A forward rate is different to a spot rate in the sense that we're not agreeing to change money right now, but we agree to change money sometime in the future. Let's say, I think the examples will be 90 days. So we agree on an exchange rate right now that we will execute in 90 days. So we basically fix the spot rate for 90 days ahead. So that's the reason why it's called forward, sometimes called also future, but we call it here forwards in our class. They're pretty much standardized, so it's typically monthly, we can do it annually too, and so on. So lots of different forwards. Now what's the basic intuition of the forward? The basic intuition is it's the covered interest rate parity condition sitting behind it, and it's kind of an insurance too. So you know for sure what exchange rate you now get in 90 days, because you wrote a contract. And what we want to figure out here is the logic, well, how much is the forward rate going to be? If we two are making a bargain now, currently the spot rate is, let's say, 0.94 US dollar cents per 1 Australian dollar. And now we start arguing, well, how much should we fix the forward rate for? So I might say I'm in favor of 0.8. And you might say, no, I'd rather have 1.2. So how can we agree on that magic number there? And there's actually economic reasoning behind it, and that's the covered interest rate parity condition. So let's just think of two different investments we can have. We have 10 million Australian dollars, and we can either invest that money in Australia at 4%. Here's getting a little bit trickier. It's only for 90 days, right? So we use this formula here. The 4% we get only for 90 out of 365 days. So you basically take the weight to take the daily percentage return, and after 90 days we have this much money in Australian dollars. Or alternatively, we could have invested in the US. If we invest in the US, we first have to switch our 10 million Australian dollars into US dollars. So we look at the spot exchange rate, so we just multiply these two numbers, and then we have how many US dollars we can get. So we've got this many US dollars basically right now. And these US dollars we don't put under the sofa. We invest, of course, somewhere too where we can earn interest. And the US interest rate in our example here is 2%. So we earn 2% on the 9.4 million. In 90 days, it's growing to 9.4 something up to this amount of US dollars. And now remember, I said the covered interest rate parity condition always holds. So if you translate that one back to Australian dollars, and if this one is giving us more than this amount of Australian dollars, what would everybody do? If I make it 0.5, if I have here 0.5, that basically means I multiply this amount by 2 to get to Australian dollars. So if it's 0.5, which is the more attractive investment, US or Australia? US is way more attractive. Do I have foreign exchange rate risk? So if I make a forward contract with you at 0.5, there's no risk, exactly. So the whole point of a forward contract is, it's the insurance. I'm fixing a certain exchange rate for in 90 days time. So 0.5, that means we have basically money on the street. Everybody would invest in the US, everybody would buy the forward, and everybody would end up with way more than 10 million Australian dollars. That would be fantastic. Let's take the counter example too. If the forward would be not 0.5, but let's say, make it 1 for 1. If 1 Australian dollar is buying 1 US dollars, according to the forward contract, which is a more attractive investment, Australia or US? Australia, right? So in that case, nobody would invest in the US. Not only nobody from Australia would invest in the US, what could you do as an American then too? You invest in Australia, so you take basically this money here, flip it over into 10 million, get this much here, and then 1 for 1, and you end up with more than 9.4 million. You end up with basically over 10 million US dollars. So that can't be true either. So the only forward contract that is in equilibrium is the one that equates these two numbers. So we take these two numbers, first thinking the number needs to be larger than 1 or smaller than 1. Australian dollars need to be more valuable than US dollars or less valuable. less valuable. So 1 Australian dollar must buy less than 1 US dollar. So you can either divide 9.4 divided by 10 or 10 divided by 9.4. In this case here, 9.4 divided by 10. That would give you the forward rate, and it's coming on later slides too. And that's how forward rates are actually calculated. They're calculated via the percentage differences here. The basic intuition, so the forward rate must match the future values here. So that no investment in one country is clearly better than the other one, because the forward rate is taking away the foreign exchange rate risk. Good. Calculating forward rates, that's the formula. You don't have to remember com terms. The easy thing here is, let's say if I have Australian dollars Australian dollars slash US dollars, that means here's Australia, here's Australia. Australian interest rate comes on the bottom and the US interest rate comes on top. As easy as that. So you plow in all the numbers. If you plow in numbers from just beforehand, you should get, I think it's coming on the next slide, right here. So here we've got the number from beforehand, the spot rate, Australian to US dollars. Then we had here the com. So the Australian one goes on the bottom, 4% on the bottom, 2% on the top for 90 days. Typing it all into your calculator, and then you get 0.9380. And actually there's lots of numbers behind it too, because it's 0.379 blah 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 blah. So we round it here, and hence the equation from before. And if you use this number, it doesn't work out 100%, but that's just rounding. But if we agree on this forward rate, the investment in Australia and the US turns out to be the same. So something else we can get out of that one, and we had the intuition beforehand with the uncovered interest rate parity condition beforehand already. If the foreign country has the higher interest rate, that means the forward rate must include an appreciation or depreciation. South Africa. If South Africa has higher interest rates than Australia, and we want to make a forward for Australian dollars to South African rand, the rand, according to the forward contract, must appreciate or depreciate. Depreciate, same logic as beforehand. So before you start with any of these calculations, think first. The gain of interest from investing in the other country must be taken away by depreciation. Otherwise, it would be a free lunch, money on the street, and everybody could get rich very fast, very easy. Because the forward is giving you the insurance, there's no risk anymore. Good. Forward points is just a different way of saying these things, the depreciation. So we have the forward rate, and we just subtract the spot rate from it, and then we get the points. And by the way, this one here is, I think, for after the... So it's similar to basis points. So this one is 0.45. But because nobody wants to talk with 0.45s all the time, very good, very good, very good. I'm not quite sure if we go through it in detail in this class, but in principle. So the question was, what's the whole point of forward contract if you don't get any gains out of it anyway? Well, it depends upon who's doing the forward contract. Just imagine, for example, if you plan to buy something in Europe, something really big. You're importing, let's say, a whole lot of furniture from Europe, and you know you have to pay for it in 6 months' time. Remember, foreign exchange rates fluctuate a lot. So if you just lean back and wait for 6 months, what can happen is that the Australian dollar is, what's your risk as an importer? What would you be afraid of? That the Australian dollar is appreciating or depreciating? Depreciating. So if the Australian dollar is losing value, all of a sudden your furniture costs more, and half a year could easily lose 20%. So that would be a massive risk for you. What you could do is you could go to the bank and make a forward contract and fix it. Now, really small people like us can't do it, right? But you can think for large companies, of course. They suffer foreign exchange rate risk, and they could go to the bank, use these forwards. That's basically the idea of what's happening behind the forward too, right? So we can have the forward from the point of view of a client. They want to insure some kind of risk. But we can also have the forward from the point of view for the one that is countersigning to you, the dealer. Now, if the dealer is promising you a certain exchange rate in the future via the forward, what's the risk for the dealer? Let's say you're signing a contract now, you will deliver 10 million US dollars, swap it into Australian dollars, 1 for 1, and an exchange rate 1 for 1 in 90 days. What would be the risk? the exchange rate is fluctuating, and that you are the one in 90 days that have to organize that money in the other currency first. And maybe you can't organize it at 1-for-1, but you have to pay a different price. And the price might be bad for you, that would be risky. But what foreign exchange dealers do is they actually don't take any risk onto their own books. Because if they agree to deliver that forward here at that time at that exchange rate, what they already do right now is they know, well, let's do it slowly. So we have a 90-day forward contract, and they're saying they're going to buy Australian dollars, this many Australian dollars in 90 days, and they switch it into US dollars at that forward rate. So they're buying Australian dollars and they're selling US dollars to you at that forward rate. And now we want to know how they get rid of the risk. Well, they know in 90 days they have to take from their client this many Australian dollars, and they have to pay their client this many US dollars, because that is the rate they agreed on. So if they are buying over 10 million Australian dollars, that means automatically they have to sell 9.4 million US dollars, because that's the rate in the contract. Now, how can they insure against any risk? Well, the trick is simply they know I have to have this many US dollars in 90 days. So how many US dollars do you need now? Well, just the present value. So if I had now on my bank account 9.4 million US dollars, I would have sufficient US dollars in 90 days to fulfill my contract. Now, how do I get these 9.4 million US dollars now? Well, I can just borrow 10 million Australian dollars in Australia, use the spot rate to invest it in the US, and then I'm done. So the dealer borrows now 10, puts it into the US market, waits for 90 days, and then has the exact amount that he needs to deliver to the other side of the forward contract. And then he gets in return for his 9.47 million US dollars this amount of Australian dollars, which he uses to repay the loan, the Australian dollar loan. So for the dealer, it is pretty much a zero-sum game in this moment. Just going full circle, no risk whatsoever. But, of course, the dealer wants to make a little bit of a game. He wants to make a living too. So he's giving you an exchange rate in the forward here that is slightly off, slightly to your disadvantage. Remember, dealer always wins. So I just rounded this one here, bit it down. Instead of 80, 79, and that's already enough to make a profit here. And remember, that is a profit with zero risk. So that's the way the market works. The dealers and the banks don't take on any risk when they write their forwards. And you can see again how the logic matches up 100% with the covered interest rate parity condition. So it's not only from an economic point of view that the covered interest rate parity condition has to hold, it's from a practical point of view too, because day on day, all these banks and dealers do these kinds of businesses to have no risk whatsoever when they're writing the forward contracts. In fact, when you ask them to write a forward contract, they look at all these interest rates and the spot rates to tell you what the forward rate will be that they're willing to sign up on, because they know that they have to make these deals to get rid of their risk. So they're earning a little bit of an income of a spread by just giving you a slightly worse forward rate that they need for the covered interest rate parity condition. But they for sure don't set forward rates as a basis of speculation. So some people believe the forward rate is what people believe the exchange rate will be in 90 days. No. When we talk about forward contracts, nobody gives a damn what the spot rate will be in 90 days. They only look at the interest rate differentials and plug it into that formula and calculate the forward rates that way. Because if you're using it by just guessing what the spot rate will be in 90 days, that would be extremely risky. So we can use the forward rate and the spot rate also to see by how much percentage a currency is appreciating and depreciating. Now remember, the interest rate differential was 4% in Australia, 2% in the US. So in Australia you earn roughly 2% more. But if you look at our numbers here for the forward, and it's only roughly because these are annual rates and this one is for 90 days. What we can see here is the percentage change would be also almost 2%. In this case, minus 2%, so the Australian dollar is depreciating by 2%, which is exactly eating up the advantage in the interest rate. So again, the same story as beforehand, just said slightly different. That relates a little bit to the question from beforehand. Also, why do we even have all these forwards and stuff like that if it's pointless anyway because we're ending up 1 for 1? Well, there's importers and exporters that do want to ensure their risk. So importers are afraid of depreciating and hence wants to get forwards. Exporters are afraid of appreciation, therefore they want to get forwards too. Also, if you get a loan or investment overseas, it would be interesting. For example, I said before, if you want to invest in Deutsche Bank, you have to do it either in New York or in Germany. That means you need either euros or US dollars. So if you personally believe that Deutsche Bank, which is currently, I think, plummeted a lot, they have some troubles, but if you believe that they recover, you would think this is a good investment. But at the same time, you might be afraid of foreign exchange rate risk. Because you strongly believe in Deutsche Bank, you don't strongly believe in the euro or the US dollar. So what you could do is you buy the shares in the foreign currency that you want, and at the same time do a forward contract to insure against foreign exchange rate volatility. Or another alternative, loan. I can tell you I was quite surprised. As you can hear, I'm German, and I was visiting my parents, and I'm currently looking at the housing market. Housing mortgage rates in Australia sitting roughly at 4%, which is already fairly cheap, I reckon. Anybody knows for how long you can fix your interest rates in Australia? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 30 years? For me, it was all new too here in Australia. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4 years, and then it becomes rather unusual. So usually Australian banks don't really offer fixed interest rates for much longer than 4 years. And it's very uncommon. Very different in Germany, because in Germany, people that get a mortgage, they are very afraid, hugely risk averse. And if you're very afraid of change, you want to fix interest rates for a long time. So in Germany, you fix your interest rates for 10, 15, sometimes even 30 years. In Europe, interest rates are currently very low. So I've seen already on the internet that mortgage interest rates are below 2% in Germany, sometimes 1.5%. But here comes the thing that I found very surprising. Anybody can take a guess if you just make a wild guess. Imagine if you want to fix your interest rates for 15 years in Germany. What might be the interest rate? What do you believe the interest rates might be in the next 5 years? Will they stay at 0? Unlikely, right? Usually interest rates, we are in an exceptional time now that the interest rates are so low. So you can imagine my surprise when I started Googling things. Mortgages in Germany, you can fix your interest rate at roughly 1.7% for 15 years. That basically means you get your money almost for free in Europe for 15 years. But exchange rates are volatile. So imagine if you get a €100,000 loan and the euro is appreciating by 20% over the next 10 years. Yes, your mortgage has a very low interest rate, but your repayments will go up by 20%. That's a huge risk. So forwards come in beautifully. But what's of course happening with the forward, just as I said beforehand? Yes, the interest rates in Europe are low, but hence the forward will build in the interest rate differential. So what you gain in getting a cheap mortgage in Europe, the forward of course will take away again. But some people might still want to get their loans in Europe, right? For example, if your bank here says no, if the European bank says yes, bang, do it together with the forward, got your mortgage. That's again, I think for private people, don't take that as a literal story. That was just to make it accessible. So for private people, getting money overseas, usually not a good idea. But for large corporation, Westpac, NAB, they do it all the time. We see later that Australian banks have a huge proportion of their liabilities financed from overseas. And they use a lot of these forwards to insure against foreign exchange rate risk, of course. Because yes, they want to get the money overseas, but they don't want to get the foreign exchange rate risk on board. Good, hedging. So exporters, importers can hedge. People that either invest overseas or borrow overseas can hedge. Summary, wonderful. Right. So we talked about direct quotation, indirect quotation, very important. We use the indirect quotation in class. So every time you see this, don't fall into the trap and think it's per US dollar or per euro. We mean the first currency here is one is buying so much of the other currency. And don't remember it as one Australian dollar, because I might give you a question where it says US dollar / euros. So don't remember everything with Australian dollar. The important thing is first currency is the one with the 1 in our class. Then we talked about spot rates. That's basically right now if you trade currencies, very, very volatile. We talked about forward rates. Here the important thing is they cover risk. We can also use it for speculation. So if I don't have an investment overseas, but I already make a forward contract right now, and I don't do the insurance deal like the dealer does. If I'm just buying the forward contract, nothing else, well then I've got the risk of the exchange rate is fluctuating in between. And we talked about different interest rate priority conditions. The uncovered one is risky because you suffer now if the foreign exchange rate is fluctuating. But the covered interest rate priority condition always holds because there's no risk. And if that wouldn't hold, it would be a free lunch and everybody would go for it.